Ruchir Sharma has done a public service for most of the West by writing a wonderful one-volume book of his childhood and India's future. It is a fabulous exercise, Democracy on the Road. Can't say enough about it. Ruchir, you begin in the middle of nowhere in Bijnor. Tell us about your childhood when you would go, the fancy pants child of a naval officer, naval attaché, whatever, and you'd go see your grandfather in the middle of Indian nowhere. What was that like?
You know, Tom, this is a personal memoir, and what I try and capture here was that what was childhood like back in India growing up in the 1970s and the 1980s. And so like this town that you mentioned was, you know, like about 160 kilometers from Delhi. But what was remarkable those days was this, that we'd go to this sort of back of beyond town there, and we had no choice. It was not like as if our parents asked us that, where do you want to go on summer vacation? You just went, were taken to your grandparents' place, and to go out this place in Bijnor, there was hardly any electricity out there. You didn't have running water all the time, and you had the sort of raw discrimination that you would think of in America a century ago. Right. You know, like the caste system in India is very sort of deep, and that's what we got to see as kids growing up out there.
Slam it forward to the president, Modi, fighting for his political life. And I want you to do that across the arc of the book in your wonderful quote, "Let me first do my Colgate." I mean, it is about an India we don't know. Tell us about the India right now that Mr. Modi confronts.
Well, the leader that you're talking about is a very big regional leader from the largest state of India, of Uttar Pradesh. And that's what he really confronts, that we, like here in the international media, like to think of India in a single narrative, which is Modi versus the opposition. But the real challenge to Modi is coming from a host of regional leaders. And that's what I try and capture in this book, that this is a country of many sort of states. It's more like the European Union than it is like a homogeneous entity. And each state has its own narrative, and that narrative is what we need to understand what this election is going to be about. It's going to be Modi versus a bunch of regional leaders, because like in India, some national identities are much stronger than a national identity. Each state believes in their own language, in their own culture. And that is something which I think we don't appreciate as we try and look India as a monolithic entity.
Yeah. And this is a very complex society, and as you put it, with family, caste, community, economics, development, money, and corruption. What will the election actually focus on? Is it economics? Is it terrorism? Is it something else?
Well, a whole bunch of factors, because to win an election in India is a massive secret in terms of what really sort of helps you win an election in India. Like, one thing I mentioned in the book is that there is a very curious term which has been popularized in India. It's called anti-incumbency. What it basically suggests is that most leaders in India tend to lose their election. This is very different from even the US or the UK, where most politicians tend to get re-elected when they try for it. In India, 2/3 of governments have lost their election ever since India became a multi-party democracy. So that tells you there's a deep frustration amongst the people about what their leaders end up delivering, because the state is so broken. And that's the challenge which really Modi faces as he heads through the polls, how to buck this trend of anti-incumbency, how to sort of deal with these regional leaders, how to sort of deal with the fact that when he goes through the south of India, and that's something we don't cover enough, the language he speaks, Hindi, is sort of not understood or even detested by many parts in the south of India. It's like you go, I captured in this travelogue of mine that if you go to places like in the south of India and you speak to them in Hindi, it's like going to the French countryside and speaking to the French in English. That's how they sort of consider it to be offensive. Well,